Hello, everyone. I am here with Alexis Grenall. She is a political consultant and a columnist whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, New York Daily News, Daily Beast, and most recently in The Nation, where she wrote a fascinating article called 46 and Done: Why Joe Biden Should Be Our Last President. How are you, Alexis?
I'm good, and thank you for having me. I want to also add that I'm officially a columnist at The Nation, so this is my new home.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah.
The Nation does amazing work. So I look forward to reading more of your work there. So provocative title. Let's just start there. Why do you believe that Joe Biden should be our last president?
So nothing against Joe Biden, it's not personal, but I have long been an admirer of parliamentary systems. I find myself gazing across the ocean or just north to Canada, hoping for a semblance of the functionality that you get with a parliamentary system of government, because presidential systems, aside from the United States, are just statistically less functional, and there's no rational reason to continue with it. And again, no disrespect to Biden, but it's such a rare experience to have a quote unquote unified government like we have right now, and unified for whatever that means in 2021. But, the midterm elections are a gamble, and historically the, unified government doesn't last. And then we'll just be back in this sort of brutal steel cage death match, which has been, a downward spiral for the last 20 years.
Certainly. And there have been many instances of the right also taking hold of having a supermajority controlling both chambers and the presidency, which I think that's disastrous from my perspective. But even the fact that we have a supermajority now, it's rare. I mean, last time we had it under Obama in his first 2 years, and the rest of the time it's just complete gridlock. So I really liked that you touched on it, and also just to touch on the Senate as well. Now that there's 50 Democratic senators and 50 Republican senators, the statistic that blows my mind is that those 50 Democratic senators represent 41 million more people. Can you talk
That's
about
right.
how that kind of imbalance in a supposed democracy, or I guess a republic, plays into your thesis here?
Yeah, well, so I didn't even tackle the Senate and the sort of basic absurdity of it. I mean, the anti-democratic filibuster aside, because it doesn't matter that there are 50 Democratic senators, they kind of aren't governing like that because they need 60 to get anything done. So what kind of situation is that? The Senate is just a bizarre body, right? So it's not about proportional representation. It's sort of about, kind of checking a box. It's absurd in Wyoming, where there's, literally two senators to one representative in the House. So, that's just like a totally different column. It played into my thesis in that I'm like, wow, American democracy is so screwed. But I'm just going to tackle the presidency for now. In a parliamentary system, though, of course, you have a very different system of representation. And you have factionalism, which we have here, but you have like functional factionalism because you have to coalition governments. And that means that like everybody's a little unhappy and also a little happy most of the time. So we're playing a game of averages here. And I feel like given the age of extremes we've been living in, I would really settle for just some average functionality.
Yeah, well, I totally understand that. You did mention the term factionalism, which was made famous by the founders, the framers, James Madison, and the Federalist Papers, who you quote in your piece. Oftentimes, organizations like the Heritage Foundation will use these pieces to argue why, even though they are in the minority in terms of representation, even though they're in the minority in terms of ideas, they deserve an equal voice because of the tyranny of the majority. How
I
does that dynamic play in?
I believe they deserve a voice, but that's kind of, in a parliamentary system, you get a voice if you get somebody elected. And then, you have a part. My argument is also we just need more parties, which is part of a parliamentary system, so that everybody can have a home, so that Republicans aren't captive to, frankly, Nazis on their right. And there are Nazi parties in other countries. Like that's a thing. You can just openly identify as a Nazi and stop pretending to be some sort of like free speech, small government Republican. That's just, I'd rather know who you are and how you vote that way rather than you trying to like make Congress with somebody who, you know, for like, I think most, like it's abhorrent in its own way, but somebody who's just like a Rob Portman, who's like, I'm not here actually to, you know, actively support white supremacy. I'm just trying to like keep taxes low and maybe just control women's bodies and that just like basic
And enrich my donors on the side. Yeah.
sure, like protect corporate America, control women's bodies, just like a little bit of like average Republican stuff. Like the Heritage Foundation guys should have a party, right? They can go party with those guys rather than these weird big tents because we're not doing well with a big tent. And same thing on the left, right? Like,
I was about to say, I mean, that's, I think, the dream for a lot of folks on the left, because not to cut you off, but I'm going to ask you to expand on this, because in terms of ideology, the Nazis and the Mitt Romneys, the moneyed interests, they'll get the same thing with either of them, basically, which is deregulation, tax cuts, etc. But there's a real ideological split on the left that is divided alongside power and moneyed interests, and it makes it even more difficult for the real left to exert their power and flex their muscle in the Democratic Party. So what would that mean for leftists if your vision were to play out?
sure. Well, so I think, you know, I use the example of Germany, right? Where the Green Party, which has been around for ages and is a joke in the United States, but is like a real thing in Germany and has actually amassed significant power, like a significant representation in the Bundestag at this point. But in order for them to do anything, they have to kind of caucus and coalition with the ruling party. And so they're making that compromise to get some stuff done. But the only reason they've been able to get to this point is because they've actively been, you know, gaining credibility. And I think at least in the American left, you know, the left has absolutely pushed the Democratic Party and the center. The center has moved. But I guess what I'm saying is I'm not opposed to centrist Democrats existing with centrist Republicans and leftists being able to just be lefties. So, you know, in my and I write this in the piece, like this, it's not a bid for ideological purity because again, like the Greens in Germany, like they're making compromises to advance an agenda here, but it just makes more sense for everyone to sort of live in the correct home and then try to work out governing together. I'm not going for perfect here. Again, I'm just hoping for functional, because right now we just don't have that. And I feel like what happens to us on the left is we get a little bit caught up in like, who's a real progressive or who's a real Democrat and who's got, you know, really working people in mind. And it's like, okay, not everyone does actually. And we should just acknowledge that and be able to like move forward.
Yeah, I totally get that. What do you say to say this just counterexample sticks out in my mind? The way Labor has exiled Jeremy Corbyn, for example, and has, in their own way, tried to stifle leftist growth in their party. And the Tories are fairly far right in their own right. But obviously, the UK is a very specific example. How does that? The way things have worked, I guess, over the past 2 decades. I mean, with neoliberalism being on the rise since Margaret Thatcher, how do you square those things?
So the UK example, I think, you know, the UK is a little funky in this.
Right. I mean, that's my caveat as well.
Like the UK throws things off a little bit. Just and to be clear, you know, for anyone watching, you know, if you're thinking also like, what about France? So France is technically a semi-presidential system. It's not categorized as a parliamentary democracy. And I'm not even really going to consider Italy in this equation. Italy is a hot mess on so many levels. So there are always going to be weird exceptions. And again, my argument is not for a perfect system. My argument is for a functional system. And I think at least in the UK, with the example of the Labour Party and Corbyn, and I have issues there because I think Corbyn, and this is a mistake that gets made on the American left too, like sort of tripped over his own shoes in a way he absolutely didn't have to. And it was, I don't actually think he's a particularly good leader. And I think Labor made a decision that they wanted to have better leadership. So that aside, I guess, I look at the,
I can see that argument. Yeah.
Yeah. But like right now here, look at Chuck Schumer, the senior senator for New York, the majority leader in the Senate now. Chuck Schumer is out there posting selfies and doing events with AOC, with every like newly elected or recently elected woman of color in the New York State legislature who's a sort of rising star in some way. That man is busy planting his flag because he sees which way the wind blows. That's actually what I consider functional, right? This is great. He's like, okay, this is where my power base is. Let me take care of it.
And fear of a primary as well.
Fears of a primary, but that's gonna be my next piece. I really don't think Chuck Schumer should be our target.
I agree, but I love the idea that he's afraid of it.
Yes, and that is everyone should be though. Like that should be a natural state of being an elected official. You should fear primaries because that means we're living in a like competitive democracy in the same way that like we want competitive marketplaces, we want competitive politics. Nobody should just be like sitting pretty. Anyway, so, Schumer, I see like making those moves, trying to like get his coalition together the same way Nancy Pelosi did, when AOC was elected, she was like, hold on, I better do a Rolling Stone cover shoot with Ilhan, AOC, and Rashida pronto. And that was smart. And she has been running she's sort of your modern day Lyndon Johnson, master of the house.
Right. Well, yeah. And an ability to kind of throw breadcrumbs out to specific factions when she knows she needs to. So in your piece, this was really interesting to me. You cite a 1979, 1989 study that found that parliamentary systems were 3 times more likely than presidential ones to have success. And then this was based on coups, basically, right? Or an overthrow. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So it's actually a 1993 study analyzing the success of democracies over the 1979, 1980 time period.
Yes.
It's a lot of numbers. The study looked at 93 countries in that frame, and it was basically countries that post-World War II had sort of reconstituted themselves as democracies or had emerged as democracies. And statistically and empirically, the data doesn't lie. Parliamentary democracies are more stable. Presidential systems are subject to military coup. It's easier to topple when you've got a winner-take-all system. And the funny thing is, like, parliamentary systems are like full of churn, right? It's actually pretty unusual to have somebody like Angela Merkel, with the UK has also had long-serving prime ministers, but also a lot of churn. Angela Merkel's she said she's not going to run again. 12 years of chancellor is enough. Margaret Thatcher was another 12-year, long hauler. But typically we have more churn in parliamentary systems, and that's a good thing. And it's both more dynamic and stable in a way that winner-take-all systems aren't. It's kind of got like an interesting conflict there that I find just fascinating.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating. It's almost symbiotic as opposed to combative, or a lot of times I think we conflate what is actually factionalism, like you cited, with bipartisan or with I'm sorry, what's the word? Shoot, I had it written down. With partisanship, not bipartisanship, with partisanship. Yeah, I should know that as someone who talks about politics, but it just escaped my brain for a second. That's not what we're not experiencing partisanship right now. We're experiencing factions and just complete gridlock, which you do touch on. So my other question to you then is, ranked choice voting is often seen as you got excited. Ranked choice voting is often seen as a way to ease some of these issues with factionalism and with a winner-take-all system in the U.S. Can you talk about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan. And in Australia, which is a parliamentary system, they have ranked choice as well. It's called preferential voting in Australia, which is probably just, I've seen lots of very funny Aussie political commercials to explaining ranked choice voting, which is hilarious. They have just like the best, most acerbic humor in Australia. But, with RCV, you always have a consensus candidate, right? No matter what, like whoever wins has to win with a majority. And that person is, the person who gets the most votes, regardless of, 1, 2, and maybe 3 votes. So in like San Francisco, Ed Lee and London Breed were the number 2 picks, the most popular number 2 pick. They weren't the person who squeaked by with like just a plurality of the vote. They had that kind of consensus. And that's actually how democracy is supposed to function. So whether or not you take an ideological analysis that says, well, that means that person's going to be more watered down and less progressive maybe, or whatever, it's like, fine, then that's the work of organizers, is to organize the politics around the mayor. The work of democracy is to elect representatives who represent the people. And ranked choice voting is the most representative way to elect people because you're getting 50+% of the vote. That's just basic. So that's like how it's supposed to work.
Well, my final question to you on this would be, we just experienced a cult of personality that emboldened somebody to take a bulldozer to much of what people thought were sacrosanct institutions. Obviously, you are advocating for a more, a very peaceful overhaul of those institutions. But it comes to mind the fact that there was this cult of personality because of the nature of a winner-take-all system. Do you think that the fact that it's so the winner-take-all nature of it emboldened that kind of
Right.
Following of one guy, the ability of one egomaniac, of somebody who has this charismatic force to kind of push a party in his own specific direction and leading it to disastrous results? Do you see that kind of playing into what you're talking about?
So for sure, and I think it's really a function of the fact that we elect presidents directly, right, by popular vote. I mean,
exactly. They have to be this,
right.
person who's on TV all the time, or who's, the center of everything. Right.
And it's different in a parliamentary system, right? The prime minister is the prime minister. He or she is the number 1 person of the ministers. So
yes,
you're elected by your colleagues. And, by the way, the thing that felled Margaret Thatcher was a vote of no confidence by her colleagues, by her own party. They were like, nah, we're done. Like, and that's how she stopped being prime minister. I think that lightness of being, the lack of cult of personality. And I mean, I'll credit AOC who said this herself. She doesn't want to be a charismatic leader. She doesn't want to be this sort of star, because it's not healthy for how we think about our politics. We actually don't want star making systems. We're talking about a representative system that's supposed to sort of like meet the needs of the masses. And it's so true. Like, the problem of direct democracy and electing a president means that you have, like, especially in the media age, you just have to have this like level of like nonstop television and Twitter and whatever.
Yeah.
A prime minister, it's just like, if your colleagues are like, ugh, you're terrible, you could be out. Theresa May was like prime minister for, a hot second, sadly overthrown because I think Boris Johnson is worse. But look, she wasn't like going to stay there forever. And my thought, honestly, when Johnson was elected, I was like, at least it's a parliamentary system, and he's unlikely to be there a long time.
Yeah. And I also just think it gives cover to those strong personalities who can basically, we saw Trump do this, and even Obama to a certain extent, deflect from critique by just being charming, like being oneself. And it's a popularity contest in a way that is less reflective of or held. It's so separate from their peers and colleagues that it's their Obama, Trump, Bill Clinton, Bush doing an entirely different brand of politics than the politics of Congress, if that makes sense to you. But that's just really my my final thought on the matter, because you've sparked so many interesting thoughts in me based on your piece. So I encourage everybody to check it out. 46 and Done: Why Joe Biden Should Be Our Last President. Alexis Grenall, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.